What's up, you guys? Stoopzz back in with another video. And one of the comments I've been getting a lot on my channel as of recent and in the past is, hey Stoopzz, can you help me fight certain classes? How do you fight against Frost DKs? How do you fight against DHs? How do you fight against Warlocks? And I've been wanting to make a video series like this for some time now. A lot of players I've noticed don't take the time to kind of read through other classes' abilities. They don't go to Wowhead and research various abilities that they're struggling with. And this is really essential to countering various classes in the meta. So in this video series, what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to kind of uncover various classes, go through some of their more important abilities. For me personally, what I look out for when I'm trying to counter these classes, or when I'm trying to heal against these classes, or even when I'm playing a DPS, because being a DPS also involves that you understand the enemy's abilities and what you're supposed to do on your end to counter them. So I'm looking to go over these abilities to kind of save you all some time. I'm going to point out some key things that you guys should be looking out for. And by looking out for these abilities, I think it'll help many of you counter various classes. Now, I'm assuming that many of you will like this tutorial series, or at least find it helpful, but I'm going to ask that you comment in the comment section below and let me know what classes you want to see in the future, because I'm just covering classes that I think players find frustrating, but there might be a class that many players want to see covered. So by commenting below, you can let me know. And if you enjoyed this video series, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you don't want to give it a thumbs up, fuck it, don't. Now, before I get into this video, I want to give a quick reminder to many of you guys out there. Remember, I am now, or temporarily banned from streaming on YouTube live stream. I am now on Twitch 6 days a week. You guys can find me on Twitch. I will put a link in the description box below. You guys can go to my stream and follow me there if you're interested in watching. My schedule will also be there. I posted a video on this recently. I just want to inform some of you that might have missed it. Now, in today's video, I'm going to be covering the Frost DK. Now, I chose this class because recently I picked up a DK, and I already knew what abilities that I should look out for as a healer or a DPS. But you always hear that DKs are so easy, they're so zug, they have like 3 buttons, and then players always complain about Frost DKs. Especially healers, they do way too much damage, they're too difficult to deal with. Now, I will admit, after playing the Frost DK, I really don't have that many abilities, but still, there are some core mechanics that you should be looking out for as a healer or a DPS. So I'm here really to break that myth about the Frost DK. Yes, they don't have a lot of abilities, but there are some things that you guys need to look out for and try and counter. And if you look out for these core mechanics, it makes the class a lot more understandable. And on top of that, it makes them a lot easier to counter. And once again, this applies to both aspects of healing and being a DPS. Now, I could go into great depth on each and every single class, but I'm going to be covering the things that you should be looking out for, the main core mechanics of each class. Now, in this specific guide, I'm going to be covering their main offensive go, their offensive mechanic. I'll be covering some of their mobility mechanics and their defensive mechanics. And I think these 3 categories are many of the potential issues that players struggle with when fighting against Frost DKs. And I will do a separate guide on Unholy DKs in the future. Now, starting off with the Frost DK's offensive setup, it all comes from, and many of you players already know this if you have a Frost DK, so you should be looking out for this when you're fighting against a Frost DK. It is Remorseless Winter and Pillars of Frost. These 2 abilities combined with Winter is Coming, this talent right here is where a majority of their damage burst comes from. Now, in itself, Remorseless Winter does damage, and in itself, Pillars of Frost is a damage buff. It also makes it so you can't be knocked back or like gripped, things like that. But on top of that, with buffs like Avalanche and Gathering Storm, they deal additional damage when using these abilities. So when they activate Remorseless Winter, they're going to be dealing additional damage when they spend their runes using like things like Obliterate. Now, this isn't very important, but you have to keep in mind that this is where a majority of their damage is coming from. It's not only the slow, it's when they're touching you or attacking you. Touching sounds a little weird, but when they're attacking you during the Remorseless Winter and they're spending runes, they're going to be getting or receiving this damage buff. So they're getting buff damage while they're connecting during Remorseless Winter. And on top of that, Pillars of Frost and Avalanche, it drops these little icicles everywhere. While Pillars of Frost is active, you'll kind of see them. There it is there. It's landing all over this target dummy. That deals also additional damage, and that is responsible for a lot of their cleave with Remorseless Winter and Pillars of Frost. When you're all grouped up, a lot of you will be taking this cleave damage, and it is due to those 2 core mechanics. One of the big weaknesses of Frost DKs is that they get kited really easily. And although they can spend runes to use things like Chains of Frost, that does take away from their damage because they can't spend those runes on things like Obliterate. So they need to make sure they're on the target at all times, and the way they stay on their target. So this is a big key point for many healers and DPS to look out for. Many of them are going to spec into Winter is Coming. You will see some Frost DKs spec into Blinding Sheet. Maybe they're playing like Walking Dead and they're responsible for setting up with Blinding Sheet. But Winter is Coming is how they immobilize their targets from moving. It's that little stun that you see happening. Now, a lot of players don't realize that this can be dispelled. So my big point here is when you see that the DK's activated Pillars of Frost. You can have Gladiator LOSSA 2, I think it's called. I might put the add-on name in the description box below. You can also just see it on their icon if you have big debuffs. You can see the little pillars coming down. It's very noticeable. It's a 1 minute cooldown, so it's very frequent. Now they can use Remorseless Winter 3 times before they go into Pillars of Frost because it's a 20-second cooldown, but every 1 minute they're able to kind of stun everyone around them during the Remorseless Winter. Now, I'll explain to you how this works. So, when you activate Pillars of Frost together with Remorseless Winter, with Winter is Coming, if the enemy is struck during Pillars of Frost and Remorseless Winter by Remorseless Winter 5 times, and you'll see this debuff stacking, that target will be stunned for 4 seconds. Now listen, again, this buff or debuff can be dispelled, so you can avoid this stun. Why is this important? As a healer, you do not ever want to let this stun go off. There's a lot of opportunities for you to kind of dispel it as it's building up, and if you can dispel it as it's building up, you can avoid that stun temporarily and then make some distance. If a DK sits on you with Remorseless Winter and Pillars of Frost, if they activate both of these abilities and they're just pounding on you, not only does a stun keep you in the DK's range, there it is, but it allows him to spend more runes to build up more damage with Gathering Storm. It also allows him to build up extra haste. Now, a lot of this other stuff isn't important. What you need to know is that a majority of the damage is going to come from that combo, and if they can keep you next to them during that combo, you're going to be taking a ton of damage. Now, why is this very important to understand as a DPS? You want to notify your healer, or your healer should be notifying you, hey, I need to dispel you, watch out, Remorseless Winter is stacking up, don't get hit by Remorseless Winter, try and make some distance, don't let that stack go off. And it's so frustrating when I play a melee DPS or a caster DPS and I have to tell my healer to dispel me, or they don't dispel me in the first place, because that can prevent you from closing out kills. Sometimes DKs will use this as a CC. It's very, very frustrating. So both the healer and you need to be looking out for this setup. So I'll show you what it looks like right now. So I'm going to activate my Pillars of Frost. I'm also going to activate my Remorseless Winter, and you're going to see this buff right here, this Winter's Come buff, building up to 5 stacks, and then it goes off. But it's a magical debuff. You can dispel this. It'll reset it. Now, you do have an opportunity to get restunned depending on when you dispel this buff. So what I will say is dispel it before it hits 5, and on top of that, try and make some distance after that. Get that debuff off you so you do not get stunned, and then look to make some distance, or during that time as it's building up and you know that DK has a kick, because to fake cast a DK, especially if it's a Blood Elf, is very hard, right? Because they have their kick, they have their grip, and they can also Blood Elf racial you to silence you. But during that time, you should be looking to activate various instant casts like Power Word Shield, Bestow Faith on a Holy Paladin, Holy Shock, Riptide, Healing Stream Totem. Use those as you're trying to get away from the DK, and before that stun goes off, dispel yourself, and then maybe Ghost Wolf away, Gust of Wind away, Feather away, Mistweaver roll away. That is very, very, very important. You want to make sure that debuff does not go off, and that is where a majority of the DK's burst damage comes from, is simply those 2 spells. So yes, it is very simple and it's common knowledge to some of you, but I see this time and time again when fighting against DKs as a DPS. When I'm playing with another healer, they don't dispel me. And fighting a Frost DK, there's not many things that you have to dispel in the first place. It's the only thing. If you're fighting with a Frost DK, chances are they're paired up with like a Warrior or a Windwalker. There's nothing to dispel anyway, so the only thing that you really need to look out for, other than like the healer's magical spells, is the Frost DK's combo with Remorseless Winter and Pillars of Frost, coupled with Winter is Coming. Now, on this topic of Winter is Coming, I also want to talk about Frozen Center. I do not want many of you to get confused with these 2 traits. Frozen Center says, when you activate Remorseless Winter, it also freezes targets within 10 yards, rooting them in place for 4 seconds. So remember, being rooted, and you'll see this a lot, a DK will pop Remorseless Winter, and it'll freeze the target in place. It'll root them in place. They might grip you, and then use their Remorseless Winter to root you in place. Do not get these 2 confused. The root is not the same thing as Winter is Coming. It is not the same thing and as devastating as that stun. So you're looking to dispel Winter is Coming, and the root effect is just by being near the Frost DK when he activates Remorseless Winter, and you saw it right there. Now, another thing I want to talk about regarding offensive abilities is Mind Freeze. Just keep in mind that Mind Freeze is a 15-yard range. What is Mind Freeze? It is like every other class in the game. Every DPS class has some sort of interrupt. Frost DKs and Unholy DKs both have a ranged interrupt. It is also magical, so it can go through bop. If you bop yourself, the DK can also kick you. But on that same note, if you're playing a Resto Shaman, you can grounding totem their mind freeze. So if you're about to die and the DK is chasing after you and he has a kick up and you're a Resto Shaman, drop your grounding totem and then look to cast on yourself. He can't grip you and he cannot use mind freeze because they are both magical spells. So do not try to bop a kick off and do not try and free cast at range if you know he has mind freeze up. And if you can grounding totem these interrupts, those being death grip technically and mind freeze, it is a huge game changer. Now I'm going to talk about DK mobility. Now they have death grip on a 25-second cooldown with a 30-yard range. Keep in mind that healing range is 40 yards, so they have to move towards you to grip you. They can't just grip you at max distance. So if you are healing at max distance, it's very obvious when the DK wants to grip you. He has to move towards you to land that grip. So keep and maintain your 40-yard distance as a healer when fighting a Frost DK. Now on top of that, they have Wraith Walk, but I want to talk about Death Grip a little bit more. If you are a Resto Druid, if you are a Mistweaver Monk, you want to track Death Grip either with nameplate cooldowns. I made a video on this. I can put that in the link in the description box below. You can also track it with Omnibar, and I also talked about how to do that in that video that is listed in the description box below. But you want to maintain and have an understanding of when Death Grip is going to be back up, because if the DK has Death Grip and you are playing a Resto Druid, you do not want to Displacer before he grips you. You want to make sure that he grips you and then you Displacer, unless you're about to die and you can, Displacer around a pillar and get out of line of sight, or it's a game over. You want to make sure that you're somehow getting away or getting him to use his grip before you Displacer. How can you do this? Well, if you're a Resto Druid, you can drop your Vortex, shift into Travel form. You can use your Sprint ability in Cat form and get away with your Vortex ability. And then he'll grip you and then you can Displacer. You want to bait out that grip before. You Displacer. If you're a Mistweaver Monk, make sure you're tracking your rolls. If he has grip up and you have one roll, the second you roll, you're gonna get grip back again. So try and look for a port before you roll, or just port out of line of sight. So use your any mobility spell as a healer and even a DPS at that to counter grip. Do not use your last standing mobility spell if he has grip up. So try and get out of grip range, or try and get out of range so he'll have to grip you and then you use your mobility. So if you're a Monk, port. If you're a Resto Druid, Vortex, bash, use your Sprint ability, shift into Travel, get away, make your distance, and then he'll grip you and then you Displacer and you're good to go. And now we have Wraith Walk. Now Wraith Walk is the only really mobility spell for a Frost DK. They have slows like Chains of Ice like we talked about earlier, but that kind of limits the amount of damage they can do if they're spamming Chains of Ice. They have grip, and then they have Wraith Walk. Now Wraith Walk is on a 45-second cooldown, but it increases their movement speed by 70%, and they cannot really be slowed below 170%, so it's pretty hard to do anything to them when they are Wraith Walking. Now on top of that, it breaks all root effects. So they activate the ability, let's say you're Frost Nova, you activate your Wraith Walk, and you can get and connect to your target. Now, what people don't understand is they can be re-rooted during that process. So if you're a Frost Mage and you see him, you're waiting for him to use Wraith Walk, get him to use his Wraith Walk on your slows, like your Frost Bolts, whatever slows you have. If you're an Arcane Mage, he'll use it, and then you can Frost Nova him in the middle of his Wraith Walk. You need to be trying to make these counter plays. You need to bait out their spells. They don't have that many spells in the first place, so baiting them out is very important. If you are, let's say, a Resto Druid, you can root his Wraith Walk. So if he's using Wraith Walk to connect, and you make some distance, or he's chasing after one of your allies, cast an Entangling Roots. You can still stick him while he's Wraith Walking. He just can't be slowed. So roots make a big difference versus Wraith Walk. And you might even bait the DK to use his AMS or his anti-magic shell as a way to catch up to a target to be prevented by being slowed by magical effects, which means you baited 2 spells for 1 opportunity, and that is a fair trade-off, a win-win situation for the opposing player, being you. I also want to talk about AMS for Frost DKs. This is different than Unholy DK's AMS. Frost DK's AMS will wipe all, and I'll show you this here, Mirror Ball. Anti-magic shell removes all harmful magical effects when activated. So you don't see this on the Unholy DK. An Unholy DK will pop their AMS, their little green shield here, and it will just absorb damage. Now, if you are a Frost DK, you put a ton of UAs into him. If he activates Anti-Magic Shell, it's going to wipe off all of those Unstable Afflictions, Shadow Word Pains, Vampiric Touches. So try and bait out Anti-Magic Shell before you dump in all of your Unstable Afflictions, all of your Shadow Word Pains, all of your damage. You can get this. You can frustrate the Frost DK depending on how good he is, depending on what rating you're at. You can bait him to use out his AMS. A really good Frost DK is probably not going to do it until he knows you're doing your all in, and then he'll AMS it all off. It's not the damage absorption that makes the Anti-Magic Shell so overpowered or powerful in general for Frost DKs. It's that artifact trait Mirror Ball that wipes everything off. So putting all of your dot damage into a target who still has Anti-Magic Shell is a bad idea. So if you're playing with another caster, or if you're playing with an Ellie Shaman and he throws out Ice Fury or Stormkeeper, you might see him use his Anti-Magic Shell. Oh, now I can dump all of my UAs without them being wiped off. Now going on the track of defensive abilities, we also have Icebound Fortitude. So we have AMS, Icebound Fortitude, and Anti-Magic Zone if they're spec'd into it. Anti-Magic Zone, not much you can do. It's a 2-minute cooldown. It's a big dome, and it reduces all damage anyone in that dome takes by magical effects by 60%. So just keep that in mind. But the other big cooldown for Frost DKs is Icebound Fortitude, which is different than when fighting against a Unholy DK. Ice in Your Veins, the artifact talent shown here, increases the heals of Deathstrike by 400% when in Icebound Fortitude. Now, Unholy DKs don't have this. They just passively use Deathstrike. Frost DKs look to use Deathstrike during their Icebound Fortitude. Now, Icebound Fortitude breaks you and makes you immune to stuns. So if you're kidney shotted, you can activate your Icebound Fortitude and you become immune to stuns, and it breaks you out of that stun. Now, on top of that, it is also a passive wall, but for Unholy DKs, they don't get that healing bonus like Frost DKs get. They just passively use Deathstrike throughout the fight. Frost DKs are different. So if you see an Unholy DK activate Icebound Fortitude, you don't have to kite away like you would versus a Frost DK. It's just a passive wall, and they're immune to stuns. But for Frost DKs, when he activates Icebound Fortitude and he's at low health, if he uses it Mongo, let's say he uses it, like he's at 80% or 90% and he just wants to kill a target, he wants to be immune to stuns, he thinks he's going to close out the game, there's really not much to worry about. But if he's low HP, he's looking to heal off of that and use his Death Strikes. Now, how do you counter this? Number one, you just make distance. You just get away from the Frost DK. If you're a mage, don't be anywhere near him. If you're a Windwalker Monk, port away. You can completely leave him isolated, and he can't Death Strike anybody to get a heal off. Also, he has to have runic power. He has to have runic power, 45 runic power. In fact, if he's trying to burst you down and he gets low and he's spending all of his runic power into Frost Strikes, he's going to have to connect to generate runic power to Death Strike. It takes 45, that's quite a bit, that's half of his bars. But if he's able to connect and get off that Death Strike, if he's able to somehow slow you, catch you in a root, grip you, he will easily top himself or get himself to half HP with one single Death Strike. So number one is keep your distance. If you're a warrior, you can disarm him when he pops Icebound Fortitude and he can't heal. If you're a rogue, you can pop Evasion. If you're a demon hunter, you can pop Blur. If you are a paladin, a holy paladin, or a prop paladin, or a rep paladin, you can bop the target and he can't hit that target to Death Strike. So whatever you can do to prevent the Frost DK from hitting that target and generating runic power and then eventually using Death Strike, whatever you can do to stop that is the best way of countering a Frost DK during his Icebound Fortitude. Now just remember, once again, the Frost DK cannot be stunned. You can root the Frost DK, you can do anything else to the Frost DK, he just can't be stunned during that time. So please keep that in mind. So I know to many of you this might be general information, and maybe many of you even have a DK or a Frost DK, but if you're not even looking out for these spells in the first place and you have a DK, shame on you. These are some of the core mechanics of DKs that every healer or DPS should be looking out for. They are not just a damage bot. They deal a lot of damage and they don't have a ton of abilities, but that allows them to be easily countered. Damage is very important in Legion, but you need to stop treating every class like they just deal insane amounts of damage. There are things that they do to allow themselves to deal that amount of damage. There are things they use that allow them to be so tanky. So you need to look out for these and try and counter these and count these abilities. Hey, we got IBF. Hey, we got AMS. We can go for a kill now. Keep this in mind, and I promise you guys, with these tutorial series, you will do much better when fighting against these various classes, including the Frost DK. But that's good for this video, you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to give the video a thumbs up. If you like these types of videos, let me know in the comment section below, and also let me know what classes you'd like to see in the near future. Try not to miss me on my Twitch live stream, where I answer all of your guys' questions in depth Do not forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.